And we're going through in chapter 27 some of the greatest fundamental teachings of Tanya. It's really powerful stuff, and I'm glad to do it together. So just a little review. The way we have it now in Tanya, and every now and then I just go back to this idea. Imagine you were coming to the Alter Rebbe, to the Rebbe, for a private audience, for a meeting, to a consultation of who you are, of trying to check in with your soul and trying to get guidance. In Hebrew, it's called the Yechidut, which is a private audience. The Rebbe, our Rebbe, of our generation, would give these private audiences to great people, to simple people. My mother was able to have a private audience with the Rebbe several times with her young child. My older brother had a French conversation that the Rebbe guided her, blessed her. For some, we actually gave to some of our significant donors a book for Hanukkah, a gift titled One by One, and it encounters people's stories of the Rebbe's guidance, blessing, advice that they would get from the Rebbe. Some of it was spiritual, most of it was very practical. But by the Alter Rebbe, who was the first Chabad Rebbe, most of the people would be coming for spiritual guidance. They were stuck. And the Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe would propel them, guide them, teach them. So at first they would come and say, I don't know what's happening. I have desires for this, have desires for mitzvahs, but then have desires and things that are disgusting. And the Alter Rebbe says that just means you're normal. You have two souls. You have a godly soul that wants a mitzvah, wants what God wants. Then you have an animal soul, a selfish soul that wants what's best for you. So the Alter Rebbe began by dissecting, analyzing the components of both of these souls. The godly soul has 10 layers, 10 soul powers. The animal soul has it as well. And then we spoke about the battle. Once we understand the players, chapter 9 began discussing the battle of these souls. We have a tzaddik, a righteous person, that according to Tanya, a tzaddik is not just in the colloquial sense, or if you go to a Jewish court, a person who is innocent, they called him tzaddik. You're a righteous, you're innocent. You don't have guilt. But in the Tanya sense, a tzaddik is a person who's perfect, a person who doesn't have any flaws. It means he doesn't have a selfish soul. He doesn't have wants that are just him. All of his wants are godly. All of his wants are pure. All of he cares about is the greater good. All he cares about is God, about the other. That's the tzaddik. Now that's very rare. You're almost born into it. Most of us don't experience that tzaddik. We don't have that tzaddik soul. We do have tzaddik moments, meaning in our day, we should have a moment that we could relate to that tzaddik moment, a fully selfless moment. On the flip side, you have a Rasha. A Rasha is not a wicked guy that's just robbing banks. A Rasha is a guy or a person who's weak, who's compromised, which means they give in to their animal soul. They have a selfish want and they can't hold themselves back. Or if they hold themselves back one day, the next day they're giving in. It's just a matter of time before they give in. That's a Rasha. So he's actually not such an evil person. It's a person who's weak, who gives in to temptation. And then chapter 12 was the Beinoni. The Beinoni is actually the name of our Tanya. The name Tanya is actually titled off the first word of the entire book. Tanya means we have studied. That's the quote from the beginning of the book, quoting a source from the Talmud. But this book is also known as the book of the Beinoni, the book of the in-betweener. Because it's talking about this person who's stuck in between, who has a battle, who is not a tzaddik, but is not a Rasha. He's somewhere in between. A tzaddik is someone who's perfect on the inside. A Rasha is one who's disgusting on the outside, which means whatever they want, they just get. Whatever they think, they just say. They don't care. The Beinoni, the in-betweener, is imperfect on the inside, which means on the inside they struggle. They have wants and desires that are coming up from their mind, arising from their mind and feelings of their heart. But on the outside, they don't give in. On the outside means the way they communicate that to the world which means their action, their speech, and even what they allow themselves to think about, that they are perfect. Which means their feelings of their heart and the pop-ups of their mind, they have a lustful desire, that they can't stop themselves. A lot of times, if you don't have a good security filter on your computer, there's pop-ups that come up. Now, if you're going to click on the pop-up and follow that link, which could be very inappropriate, or if you're going to X out and say, I don't want that, that's where the Beinoni is at. He's struggling. The pop-up that comes up from his mind, from his heart, that he can't control. But if he's going to click and pursue it, or if he's going to click out of it, that's where the Beinoni is. The Rasha clicks on it and says, wow, I want this. I can't help myself but look at it. The Beinoni says, oi, it popped up again, but I'm going to X out it. The Beinoni, according to Tanya, is someone who's struggling, but has the power to control themselves. And here's the secret. We all have that power to control ourselves. That was the basic tenet of the first 25 chapters of Tanya. That we're a Beinoni, and every day we struggle and we could control ourselves. But now chapter 26 and 27 is troubleshooting, where the chassid, the Jew, comes back to the Rebbe and says, your advice was amazing. It helped. I was able to control myself, but I still feel disgusted. Because even after I control myself, I feel depressed. There's things that come up that pull me down. So the first rule of chapter 26 was depression is not an option. Joy is the only way of how we can serve God. Because if we pull ourselves down, and when I say depression, I'm not talking about clinical depression, that you need a proper counselor and a therapist and a psychiatrist and medication. We're talking about the classical depression where you just feel down and you need to jumpstart yourself. So the 26 was talking about feeling down and feeling sluggish from different things that are coming up in your life, whether it's more material, family based, or if it's spiritual and religious based. So chapter 26, we divided. If you're feeling down and your sadness, your melancholy, if it's coming from worldly matters, from financial concerns, of livelihood, of my job, of my career, of my raise, those worries that are coming up that are making you feel down and anxious, or if it's family matters, Nachas concerns, that your children are not giving you Nachas, or fertility issues, or health issues, both of your health or of another person's health around you. Hold on 1 second, everyone. Let's see, there we go. That's it. If it's Nachas things from around you, so we have to, the Alter Rebbe has to give you guidance of how not to let that come and eat you up. So the first part of chapter 26, after he said that we have to serve God with joy, if there's things that are coming up that are stopping your joy, we have to work on it. If it's things that are coming up from worldly concerns, from livelihood, from Nachas issues, from health issues, and family issues, you have to realize that just like the Talmud says, that just like you have to serve God, you have to bless God on the good, you have to bless God on the not good. Because in truth, there's two layers of good. Everything from God, everything that comes in the world is good. Some is what we could see, and that's the one we appreciate and want and pray for a loaded bank account, for enormous nachas, for good health, a bill of health. Very good. And Yaakov, I see you just popping up from the chat that exactly, Rav Nachman of Breslov, we say that Rav Nachman of Breslov, you have to serve God with joy. It's there's many quotes like that say similar. So if there's things that are coming up that are preventing that, you have to realize that it's actually coming from a deeper source of good. Not necessarily do you appreciate, but just know that it's actually coming from a higher layer. Kabbalistically, it's coming from the level of Alma Diskasya. from the hidden layer of God, the layer of God that is too high for it to come out in this world. And we discussed that at length in chapter 26. And then the second part was, but what if the feelings of sadness is coming up because of guilt, because of past misdeeds, things that you regret doing, sins that you did, and transgressions that you transgressed that are pulling you down. You feel disgusting and despicable over my past actions. And that, it's real, it's the real stuff. It's things that I've done. So the Alter Rebbe says you should know that those are coming from the tactics, the tricks of the Yetzer Hara, from the animal soul. They're trying to pull you down, because if you're in your work day, it's not a time to feel down. If you're a doctor, you're supposed to be thinking about medicine when you're in the field. If you're a lawyer, you're supposed to be thinking about law. So if feelings of guilt are coming up when you're supposed to be in your work time and with your family, you should know that it's just your Yetzer Hara, the animal, the evil inclination, trying to pull you down, trying to find a method of disguising itself in a religious atmosphere. Oh, look what you did, and make you feel bad, but it's making you sluggish. And what happens is the vicious cycle. It's going to make you want to perform another sin because you want to numb yourself because of the guilt that I'm feeling. And it just continues. It's coming from the tactics of the Yetzer Hara. So what you answer then is you have to tell the Yetzer Hara, let's set a time for this. And we'll make an appointment tonight at 9. Let's deal with it. And you have to go through it. But make it a time. Don't let it come up when it wants. You have to be in control. Don't let the sadness control you. You control the sadness. And then when you have that, when you are in charge of it, you deal with it. You analyze it. And then it should bring you to a state of joy. You dealt with it. So you don't carry on that guilt anymore. You deal with it. And then from the darkness of that guilt that you're feeling, it actually, you get a profit. There's a state that you could serve God with the experience that you had, with the mistake that you made, and the outcome and the result of the correction that you have now. You come to a greater state. That's teshuvah. It's supposed to propel you forward, springboard you to an even greater place. That's how you're supposed to deal with it. But now, chapter 27 is actually, it's incredible. What happens when the chassid, the Jew, comes back to the Rebbe and says, I have another issue. I'm not worried about the sins that I did because I did teshuvah on this. What I'm worried is I feel two-faced. Because even if on the outside I'm a good guy, on the outside I do the right action, I have the right speech, I have the right lingo, but on the inside I know what's going on. I know the fantasies, I know the lusts, I know the disgust that is going on in my heart. If only those people would know who I really am on the inside, they wouldn't respect me. So how could I respect myself knowing what's going on the inside? So it's a feeling of shame, not necessarily on what I did. That was chapter 26. It's a feeling of shame, that's guilt. This is a feeling of shame over what I'm feeling, over what I know I want to do. And those are inappropriate things. Those are disgusting things. You wake up at 3 a.m. and you want to rob a bank. So you're hitting yourself for the desire that you have. And by the way, use the ... to figure out other inappropriate thoughts. So what do you do with that? So over here comes an incredible lesson from the Alter Rebbe, chapter 27. We're learning that if the feeling is a feeling of shame, not over what I did, but over what I'm feeling now, you should know that a tzaddik doesn't have those feelings. Because like we said before, a tzaddik is perfect on the inside. The emotions, the feelings, and the mind, the ideas that come up in the mind of a tzaddik are all perfect, are all holy, are all godly. That's what the definition of a tzaddik is. So the fact that you have these feelings is because you're a Beinoni, because you struggle. You're not perfect on the inside. And I'll give you a secret. You're not meant to be perfect on the inside. You're meant to be a Beinoni. We signed up for this. It wasn't in our destiny to ever be a tzaddik. We have to strive to be a better person. But let's wish that we could even just be a Beinoni. A Beinoni is someone who's perfect on the inside. An absolute mensch. It doesn't mean that they're perfect on the outside. It doesn't mean that they're perfect on the inside. I hope is that what I said? They're not perfect on the inside. They have fantasies, lusts, and desires, but they never act on them. They struggle. They have thoughts that come up and they push it out. They substitute them with another thing. So the fact that you have these feelings that are inappropriate, you should know that a tzaddik doesn't have them. So you have the opportunity to fulfill a mitzvah that a tzaddik can't fulfill. It's part of our Shema prayer. In the prayer of Shema that we say in the morning and evening, there's actually 3 paragraphs. There's the famous paragraph of the Shema and Ve'ahavta, but then there's another paragraph called the Hayam Shemoah, taken from a few chapters later in Deuteronomy from Moses. But then the 3rd paragraph is about tzitzit. It's from the book of Numbers. God gives Moshe the commandment of a talis, of a tzitzit. It's in the book of Numbers. In that paragraph, it actually says, don't stray, don't go after your heart and your eyes' desires that they lust after. Who is this verse talking about? The commandment is, don't stray, don't let your thoughts wander and your eyes wander and your heart go after the desires. Who is this speaking to? Not a tzaddik, because the tzaddik doesn't have lust, doesn't have these desires. It's talking to a Beinoni. It's talking to me and you, that we have these feelings that come up, and the mitzvah is don't push them away. Meaning it's not saying don't have those feelings. That's unavoidable. It's saying don't go after them. Don't pursue them. Don't let them in. Like the story I've said several times, and we have some friends in the class that I don't think heard the story yet. You'll probably hear it from Medina in one of her classes that she starts today on Torah and Tea. She's giving an overview of Tanya. I strongly recommend it. It's at 1:00. The story of a chassid a student of the Maggid, the teacher of the Alter Rebbe, who we're studying in our class, the author, a disciple of his said, what should I do if I have stray thoughts? I'm praying, I'm trying to meditate, and it's always this way. When you're praying, is all those thoughts are coming up. Because when your good side is heightened, there's a battle, and the negative side is trying to match it. So he says, oh, you have stray thoughts. I want you to go to a certain chassid. And I think he sent him to Reb Zev Kitzis, another great, famed, esteemed chassid. And it was late on Friday when he arrived to this shtetl in Ukraine to visit the chassid. And he knocked on the door. And the host, the chassid that the disciple was sent to, didn't answer the door. So he knocked again. He knocked louder. There was no doorbells, and it was getting close to Shabbos. And he thought maybe because there's kids inside screaming, getting their baths and getting ready for Shabbos, that he can't hear. So he's banging from the window, nothing. So he basically feels ignored, and he has to go to the shul. It's already time for evening prayers. And he stays in the shul the whole Shabbos. After Shabbos, the chassid who didn't open the door on Friday, he said, oh, I didn't realize you were here. It's so nice to see you. It's been so many years. What brings you to town? He says, well, our teacher, the Maggid, in Mezrich, which was the city of Ukraine where he was from, told me to come to you because I'm having struggles. I'm having foreign thoughts. I'm having stray thoughts, lustful desires, and I'm trying to learn how to get rid of them. What do I do? He says, well, I don't know. Why did he send you to me? He says, well, I knocked on the door and you didn't answer. He says, oh, that's your answer. I heard your knock. I just wasn't available to answer the door. So not every knock on the door do you have to answer. So the knocks are there. The pop-ups are coming up, but you don't have to answer them. So the Beinoni, which we're dealing with now in chapter 27, is someone who he's struggling. He's fulfilling the mitzvah of the Torah that he has struggles. Don't go after them. Don't let them in. So you should not only be shamed that you have these desires, you should actually be joyful that there's a mitzvah that you can do that the tzaddik can't, that you are given that opportunity to fulfill a mitzvah that other people don't have. It should actually bring you to a state of celebration. That you could fulfill a mitzvah by not letting it in. Because you could control yourself. You can control yourself. And when you do, you're fulfilling this mitzvah. The tzaddik doesn't have what to control, so he doesn't fulfill this mitzvah. So it's a beautiful idea where we're not telling the person that you're a disgusting person for having those thoughts. We actually say you're normal, but don't feel shameful for having it. It doesn't say post it on Facebook that I'm having these erotic desires. That's not what we're saying. But we're saying deal with it by realizing that you could push it away. And when you do, you're fulfilling a mitzvah. And when you're doing that, you should be joyful. And here's another cool part of this chapter that we learned, that on the contrary, if it's getting you down, it's actually because of your arrogance. Because you feel I'm a tzaddik, I'm perfect. And because of my perfection, if I'm having those desires, that means I'm not a tzaddik. And that hurts my feelings. So the shame and the feeling of, not the shame, the feeling of sadness that is following the shame is actually coming because of my arrogance. I hope that part makes sense. So the Alter Rebbe is turning it around. That if you would actually know your place, you wouldn't feel bad for yourself. You would feel joyful that I could fulfill this purpose. The third Chabad Rebbe, his name was Rabbi Menachem Mendel. He died in the 1860s. And our Rebbe, it's interesting, the third Chabad Rebbe, who was the grandson of the Alter Rebbe, who's the author of the Tanya of Shner Zalman, his grandson, his name was Rabbi Menachem Mendel. Tragically, Menachem Mendel's mother died when he was 2 years old. The Alter Rebbe's daughter died when she was in her 20s. Before she died, she asked that her father raise her child. So the Alter Rebbe, in his 50s, raised his grandson, on his lap, which is an amazing thing because he was the Rebbe and he was raising his 2-year-old. And we have so much guidance of how we conduct ourselves as Chassidim and how we educate our children from the way the Alter Rebbe educated his grandson. One example that we do with our children, we have, it's a Yiddish word, it's a pretty tricky word to pronounce. It's called an Arayin Firnish. Arayin Firnish, Arayin is Yiddish, and Barbara, you can help me with the wording. Arayin means inside. Firin means to lead. So Arayin Firnish means when you lead the child inside. After the child's first haircut, which is at the age of 3 years old, it's called an upsharin. We cut the boy's hair. For a girl, when they reach the age of 3, they start lighting Shabbos candles. Because the age of 3 is the commencement of the formal education of a Jewish child. So for a boy, that means they have long hair, and now we teach them the mitzvah of payas, which is the little sideburns, the side locks. And for a girl, it means teaching them to light Shabbos candles. But right after that, we actually whisk them in with the talus. We wrap a talus around them, and we whisk the child into a classroom of young children, and we start teaching them the Aleph Bet. And what we learned from the Alter Rebbe of how he raised his grandchild is right after he gave his grandchild a haircut. His mother wasn't around when he turned 3. He threw candies at him. He wrapped him in a talus. He threw candies at him, and he said, "This is coming from Malach Michael. It's coming from one of the great angels that is celebrating your education, your learning Torah." And you teach them the Aleph Bet. And I remember this as a child myself. I should have brought it. If I would have known I was sharing the story, I would have brought it. I was given a chart of the Aleph Bet, and I went into a classroom, and we have a picture of it. It has my name on the bottom, and they put honey on the first few letters, on the Aleph and the Bet. And the teacher sits me on his lap, and he makes me say the letter Aleph, and I repeat after him Aleph, and then I lick the honey off the letter. And then the first letter of my name, Menachem, he puts it on the Mem, and I say Mem, and I lick the letter off the Mem. And the reason is that our first touch of Torah should be a sweet one. That we should realize that Torah and mitzvahs is sweet. That we don't look at the hardship. There are hardships of being a Jew, especially in the olden days and pogroms. But we focus on the sweetness, the love, the joy, the celebration of our Judaism. So we do that with all of our children now. Similar to how the Alter Rebbe raised his grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek, Menachem Mendel. He was known as the Tzemach Tzedek, named after one of the great works and books that he authored. So the third Chabad Rebbe, his name was Menachem Mendel, he loved learning. He was diligent and He just learned all day. And someone came and says, Rebbe, what should I do that I don't have a desire to learn? I don't want to learn. So the Rebbe responded to him, and what should I do? What should I do that I do have a desire to learn? So the Rebbe was telling him, I don't have your issue. You should celebrate the fact that you don't have the desire to want to do good and you still do it. Or you could have a desire to want to do bad and you hold yourself back. It's actually it's something to celebrate. We're going to learn in the words of Tanya in chapter 27. We always talk about the great word Nachas. Nachas means to bring pride, whether to your parents or to your children give to you, or to your spouse even. It's the idea of great satisfaction on seeing your child raised in the ways that you want. Or it could be your dog that you have such nachas. I see as Shira, your dog is learning Tanya with you. It's good. But there's also a concept that is not really so spoken about of nachas to God. Giving great joy to our Maker. How do we give nachas to God? You would think it's about giving $1 million to charity. Or it's about learning the entire Talmud. Definitely that makes God happy. But the greatest nachas is when you hold yourself back from not doing what you have a desire to do. That causes the greatest nachas by God. We're going to learn it. It's from the Zohar. It's from the greatest Kabbalistic books. It's even given its own Kabbalistic name. In Aramaic, which is the Kabbalistic language, it's called iskafia. Iskafia means bending yourself, holding yourself back. So you may have a desire to do something, hold yourself back. That causes the greatest joy by God. That a tzaddik can't do, because he doesn't have a desire to do that. So you could cause the greatest joy to God that the perfect person can. You're serving God in a way that he's not serving, or she's not serving. And that should actually bring you to a great joy. Okay. Robin, remind me what page we're up to?
My job. I think we're on the bottom of page 307.
Good. Perfect. Let me pull up. Is everyone in agreement? I'm assuming if we're a couple Jews on the call, on the class, we're going to have disagreement on where we're up to. A different opinion? Anyone? Okay. Yeah, it's a great place to start. So I'll be reading a lot inside. I'll be trying to cover ground, because obviously on my own, I could just linger and talk. I like hearing myself, but I'll do you all a favor and we'll actually study the text. Okay, so thank you, Eliza. All right, so we're on 307 at the bottom. I'll pull up the Kindle and let's take it away. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed one thing. I'm not looking at the questions. I apologize. Let's just go through them. I always enjoy learning them together. So when Robin says we are Russia, in May, when we learn chapter 11, and for those that weren't on the classes by chapter 11, they are recorded. And I said something that was pretty fun, that the chapter 11, which it talks about the Russia, it's the most depressing chapter when we actually realize, wait a minute, that's me. Someone who gives in to temptation, I do that. And but we're going to learn some beautiful wording in this chapter that's going to complement and realize that to be a Beinoni is our goal. And every moment that we're holding ourselves back and we regret over past misdeeds and we're doing the right thing, meaning through teshuvah, that moment we are a Beinoni. Meaning there are times that we give in. But as long as I'm not committing to the next sin and I plan and I commit to never do it again, that is a Beinoni. You are a Beinoni. For those 5 minutes that I'm doing good, we're a Beinoni. We're going to see some pretty cool words, and hopefully we learn today that if you hold yourself back by doing a sin, by simply sitting on your couch and doing nothing, that you fulfill the mitzvah. By sitting on your couch and doing nothing, when I have a desire to sin, that itself fulfills the mitzvah of not going after what your heart desires. So by sitting and doing nothing, when I have a desire and a lust for something that's inappropriate, you could do it. You have a mitzvah. Although we're going to learn, I don't know if we're going to learn in this chapter, but I do also just want to address that the Talmud doesn't recommend doing nothing when I have a desire. You should actually run to a yeshiva, it says, and study Torah. Because the beautiful wording of the Talmud And Barbara, I should ask your husband the source. I think it's in Kiddushin. I'll have to check it up. I didn't have my coffee. I have to get it from the coffee machine. So maybe after I have a couple swigs of the coffee, it'll come to me. But until then, it says that if you have a desire and you're feeling disgust, you should run to yeshiva and learn Torah. Because if the desire is as strong as fire, like a passion like fire, Torah will melt it. Because Torah, Torah is compared to water. If it's as strong as a rock, Torah will shatter it. Because I think Torah is as more powerful than a rock. He brings verses to prove these things. So anyway, a little off topic, but yeah, thank you. Barbara, I asked you last week if you were going to share about the Rabbi Rice's Tanya class. We decided most of the class were Beinani wannabes. Oh, that's a good term. I like that. Did you remember that, or is that from your notes? That's incredible. Beinani wannabes. I like that. But usually a wannabe is almost like insulting term. You're a wannabe, I think. But over here, a Beinani is the biggest compliment. Meaning, if you were to compliment another person, we usually say, "Oh, you're a tzaddik." If you learn Tanya, the greatest compliment you could say is, you're a Beinani. And I think I shared this months ago, so I'll just share it again, that there are Beinanim in the world that are full-fledged Beinanim. And one of them lived in Montreal. And his nephew stayed with him for a few days, and his nephew is someone I know. So his nephew asked him and said, there's a rumor that you're a Beinani. Is that true? His name was Rabbi Nistan Nemenov. There's a rumor that you're a Beinani. Is that true? So instead of answering the question that, yeah, I'm a Beinani, or lying and saying, no, I'm not, he says, you could be a Beinani too. He tells the 8-year-old nephew, you could also be a Beinani. He says, really? How could I be a Beinani? He says, go and open a prayer book, Tehillim, chapter, the book of Psalms, and recite some Tehillim. So he went and he started reciting Tehillim. And after 5 minutes, the uncle comes to him and says, what were you doing during these past 5 minutes? I was praying. Did you do anything bad? He's like, no, I was saying words of Torah. Did you say anything bad? No, I was saying words of Torah. Did you say anything that's not appropriate? No. And did you have any thoughts that are inappropriate? He says, no, I was thinking, why is my uncle trying to get me to do this? He says, for those 5 minutes, you were absolute Beinani. Meaning your speech, your action, and even what you were thinking about was not inappropriate. Those 5 minutes, you were a Beinani. Now continue those 5 minutes for the next 5 minutes, and then for the next 5 minutes. And that's what a Beinani is. So a Beinani wannabe, I like that. Yaakov, that's a great thing. Hashem creates all. So he created the Yetzer Hara. Was this done to provide us with struggle, hoping we will choose the right path? Yeah. Shira's, that's a great, we have the opportunity to perform a mitzvah. Awesome point that Hashem, there's a few good quotes in the Talmud about it. But yeah, the Yetzer Hara is there to do its job. We actually quoted, if you remember, we quoted a pretty heavy parable. I think it was in chapter 11, talking about the parable of the king. The king wants to test his prince. He has an only child. He knows this prince is going to take over the monarch, take over the kingdom. He wants to make sure he's going to be a good king. So he tells the prince, I want you to be careful on who you are with and work on yourself to be better. And the king then hires, the words in the Hebrew is, the king hires a zona. The king hires a prostitute to try to trip up the prince, to try to get the prince to do what he's not supposed to. So on one hand, the prostitute, the person has to do her job. She's hired by the king to try to trip up the prince. So she has to do whatever promiscuity and flirtation, whatever that has to do in order to do her job, to respect the king. But at the same time, deep down, she's actually hoping that the prince doesn't succumb, that the prince holds strong, so that he could grow without having to fall and not listen to his father. So in the same way, God hires the Yetzer Hara to test us, but even the Yetzer Hara deep down hopes that we do our job. And we learned that it's not the story is not actually from the Tanya. The Tanya just quotes and references the story from the Zohar. Yaakov, you're funny. All right, good. So we are on 307 at the bottom. I'm pulling up the Kindle, and let's do this together. Let me just match it up with the screen. Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Hold on 1 second, everyone. These are you good? I'm sorry, it's a little cold. I forgot to, I'll fix it up for you.
Okay.
All right, let's see it inside. Feel free to ask questions as we go through the text. The Tanya now clarifies precisely which mitzvah you will be fulfilling. By refusing to dwell on a negative thought, you fulfill the verse, which is, and you shall not follow after your heart and after your eyes, after which you stray, from the book of Numbers. Now, this verse can be speaking to tzaddikim, who have, tzaddikim is the plural of a tzaddik, the fully perfect person, who have transformed themselves never to have inappropriate thoughts. This cannot be the case, as the verse would not refer to tzaddikim as strayers, God forbid. The verse states, and you shall not follow after your heart and after your eyes, after which you stray, addressing those individuals who are at least tempted to follow their inappropriate thoughts. So who is this verse referring to? Rather, the verse is addressing those who are still tempted by the impulse to evil, such as Beinanim and Rishayim, who do have lustful thoughts popping into their minds, whether they be thoughts of permitted activities or forbidden ones. See above, chapter 11. This means the verse is speaking of people, let me turn the page, who are plagued by such thoughts, but subsequently avert their attention from these thoughts, fulfilling this biblical prohibition, and you shall not follow, which means they have the thoughts, the desires that are inappropriate, and they substitute it with another thought that's not inappropriate. That's right. Technically, however, you didn't do a mitzvah by pushing away these negative thoughts. You just avoided transgressing a prohibition, and you shall not follow, etc. Why then should this lead you to joy? Meaning you just didn't fulfill a negative mitzvah. So why is that considered a mitzvah? Let's see that inside. Why should it lead you to joy? It makes sense that through a positive mitzvah, which brings you closer to God, you would become joyous. But now you seem to be no closer than before. You just avoided becoming more distant. It's there's a rabbi friend. He's like famous for saying every time he doesn't have what is the California roll called when you don't fully stop at a stop sign, you just roll past it. Is it called a California roll?
I think it's called the Hollywood roll.
Oh, a Hollywood roll. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The Hollywood roll. So this rabbi says he doesn't mean it seriously, but I think he uses it as an example that he's rich because he's avoided. He's done so many Hollywood rolls and he didn't get a ticket for all those times. He feels like a millionaire for all the tickets that he avoided. But in truth, he made no money off that. So there's one thing, I don't know, whatever, if that made sense, but the point over here in Tanya is it's one thing when you fulfill a mitzvah, whether it's going to the mikvah or lighting Shabbos candles or eating kosher, actually, or giving charity, you feel good. You feel joyous. I did a mitzvah. It's amazing. But when I avoid doing a sin, why should it lead me to joy? I didn't do anything good. I just avoided doing something bad. So why should that lead me to joy? That's what we're saying here, that when you avoid going after the lust of your hearts and your eyes, it should lead you to joy, but you didn't fulfill a mitzvah. You're at square one. You didn't do a sin, but you didn't do a mitzvah. So why should it lead us to joy? I think that's what he's about to address in the middle of the top paragraph. It makes sense that through a positive mitzvah, which brings you closer to God, you will become joyous. But now you seem to be no closer than before. You just avoided becoming more distant. So, and our sages of blessed memory taught, so he's addressing this, one who stays put in the face of temptation and does not transgress will be given the same reward as if he had actively performed a positive mitzvah. So when I have a desire and I stay put. I don't give in to my temptation. I hold strong. You may seem that you're not really doing anything, but really you're given the reward as if you did a mitzvah. And that should lead you to a state of joy. Therefore, after diverting your attention from an inappropriate thought, you ought to rejoice at having obeyed the biblical prohibition, with the same level of joy as if you had actually fulfilled a positive mitzvah. Okay, I hope that's clear. I gave you kind of the outside of what we're just learning, so I'm going to continue on so we could learn more text. But of course, if anyone needs the clarification or feels uncertain on a certain part over here, please let me know. I'll be happy to explain to my best ability. Okay, section 2. How your ego tricks you. So this is the good one. Your ego is going to get all self-righteous, and your ego is going to try to pull you down and saying, "Oh, how could I have such lustful thoughts?" The reality is that by diverting your attention from an inappropriate thought, you have done everything right and nothing wrong. Why then would you imagine this to be a source of sadness in the first place? You didn't do anything wrong. You diverted your attention. Why would it even get me down? Why would I feel depressed over an inappropriate thought that I didn't let in, that I didn't open the door? So on the contrary, sadness from inappropriate thoughts comes from an inflated ego. For those that have been a part of the class for a while, one of the main things Tanya addresses is the concept of negating our ego. In Hebrew, the word is bitul, humbling ourselves. So the fact that you feel sad over the inappropriate thoughts, meaning with not the sin, because over chapter 27, we're not having the guilt over the actual misdeed. It's just about the desire. The fact that I could desire such things makes me feel down. Why? Because it's coming from an inflated ego. Such a sadness is not, as it may first appear, the result of a holy urge to become a better person. It's a trick of the ego. So on the surface, it seems like a very righteous thing. Oh, yeah, I feel so bad over what's going on in my mind. And that takes you down. But really, it's coming, it seems like a righteous, holy feeling, but really it's a trick of the ego. How is that? Let's see it. That you don't know your place. That's a quote from Ethics of the Fathers, from the Mishnah. And realize that you haven't yet transformed yourself to be rid of the impulse to evil. And your inflated ego makes you feel depressed that you're not at the level of a tzaddik. And since tzaddikim definitely don't have such foolish thoughts, you get sad when you do have them, meaning you don't know your place. So you don't realize that you're not rid of evil. You're not rid of the animal soul inside of you. You think that maybe you're a tzaddik, and a tzaddik doesn't have these thoughts. So since you don't know your true place, and your ego is pushed up to the point that you think you're a tzaddik, so when you realize that you're not, it makes you feel, oh, how could I allow this in? All this is delusional thinking of the ego, because if you would know your place, you would realize that you are very far from the level of a tzaddik. And the expectation of being free from inappropriate thoughts is totally unrealistic. To be free of these fantasies that come up is not possible for most of us, because we're not a tzaddik. They pop up. We have an animal soul inside of us that is always trying to get in. You could control yourself and not follow those thoughts and that impulse, but the impulse will be there because you're not a tzaddik. The next words in the Hebrew are actually very famous. And I'll just quote the three words in Hebrew that's coming up. V'halavai haya beinin. And a more realistic expectation would be if only you would become a Beinoni and not be a Rasha for even one moment the whole of your life. The whole of your life. Try to be a Beinoni. That's our goal, to be a Beinoni. Which again, a Beinoni is someone who's perfect on the outside, someone who controls their action, someone who controls their speech, and someone who's controlling their thoughts, not allowing it to go in an inappropriate place. doesn't allow their fantasies to carry through. So you may have a lustful desire and it pops up, but a Beinoni holds back and says, no, I'm not going to let my mind go there. I'll focus on something else. You can't stop yourself from thinking of something, but you could stop yourself from thinking about it. You don't allow that train of thought to continue. A Beinoni has control of it. So the beautiful words of the Tanya is, realize your place. Realize that your place is not to be a tzaddik. And that's okay. Our place is to be a Beinoni. And if you would realize your place, you wouldn't have an inflated ego and think, oh, how could I have lustful desires? As we learned above, to reach the level of Beinoni, you don't need to rid yourself of the temptation to sin, but only from actual sin. Right? It's in the garments. The Beinoni holds back from what's the outside of the soul, which is the thought, speech, and action. This goal is attainable. And by the way, just what's interesting is when we say actual sin is not just action. Actual sin is also speech and thought. There's certain sins that we perform through speech. A famous one is lashon hara, gossip, and I forgot the better word for it, but another word, but evil tongue, speaking negative about another person. That's speaking. And another one is allowing the fantasies to come up in my mind and to pursue them. We're not allowed to think those things, even though you would think it's just in my mind. But if you're pursuing inappropriate thoughts and fantasies, that's sinful. And sometimes, I think we quoted from Tanya before, what you think about in your thoughts and allow the fantasies to continue in your thoughts could actually be worse than what's happening in speech and action to a certain degree. So all that is considered actual sin, and a Beinoni is on top of it. A Beinoni controls their actual sin, but can't control the temptation to sin. The temptation to sin remains in the Beinoni. So don't get all sad on yourself that you have a temptation to sin, because you're a Beinoni. Strive to be a Beinoni, and realize that you'll have temptation, but you control yourself. Impulse control. This goal is attainable by every person, since we are given control over our actions and thoughts. Powerful stuff. We're at the top of the page on the Kindle. To aim towards an even greater goal of eliminating the urge to sin, which is a tzaddik, before reaching complete mastery over thought, speech, and action, which is a Beinoni, is unrealistic and counterproductive. Which means if you're not yet on the level of a Beinoni, which means you don't have control over your thought, speech, and action, and you're saying, oh, why am I not a tzaddik that has full perfection of the urge of the temptation, that's counterproductive. It is, in fact, nothing other than a trick of the ego, trying to get you depressed, which will lower your resistance to sin. So what Beinonim are capable of in their worship is to always get the better of the impulse to evil and expel inappropriate thoughts that rise from the emotional center in the heart to the brain. To divert the mind completely from them. And Shira, I think you quoted the next few words. You quoted this before. I think we had it in a previous chapter. And to dismiss each inappropriate thought vigorously with two hands, as mentioned earlier in chapter 12. So there's two ways of how to dismiss something. When you dismiss something with one hand, the other hand could still be there reaching forward to try to get it back, which means it's not full-hearted. When you dismiss something with two hands, it's fully a forceful get away from me. Like push it away. A Beinoni is someone who is capable of always getting the better of the impulse, which means the impulse is there, but they expel it. They push it away. They divert their attention. So they can't stop it from coming, but they totally dismiss it. They divert their attention. If you aim for this lower goal of Beinoni now, which is realistic, you can succeed and feel happy about your achievement. If you aim to be a tzaddik, expecting not to have inappropriate thoughts at all, you are setting yourself up for disappointment. Beautiful words. I would love, I don't have it in the in the text on the Kindle, so I'll pull off the screen for a second. If everyone could follow along, if you have the book, it's on 309. There is a practical lesson. So either you're going to listen to me or you can read along. It's a little long, it's 2 paragraphs long, but it looks like it's a nice one. So here's the practical lesson of the day. Don't get upset if your mind is constantly distracted by inappropriate thoughts when not at worship. Actually, you should be happy, since this gives you the opportunity to do a mitzvah and divert your mind from these inappropriate thoughts by contemplating something else. Getting upset about inappropriate thoughts is delusional. It's your evil inclination trying to get you depressed by setting an unreasonable goal. First, worry about achieving mastery over your thought, speech, and action, which you can do. So that's what we should be working on, the mastery over our garment, which is our thought, our speech, and an action. Don't get hung up over the fact that I have an impulse, I have a desire for something inappropriate. So don't feel shame as a result of what's going on inside of me. On the contrary, don't give into it because you're a Beinoni and you're striving to be a Beinoni, but realize that you have what it takes to divert your attention. Because we all have that, like we learned in chapter 12, we all have the capacity by birth to be a Beinoni, the mind to rule over the heart. So don't beat yourself up of having these inappropriate thoughts. Don't allow the shame to come through, because the shame is a tactic of the Yetzer Hara. The shame is the trick trying to get you to get down and to look for a reprieve, a quick relief of it, which is to numb yourself with another sin. So don't give in. Realize that just pulls you down. And when it pulls you down and you're sluggish, you can't serve God. So this is another beautiful troubleshooting. When you're feeling not only the guilt over a past sin, over here it's feeling the shame over what's going on inside my heart. And the feeling of two-face, of hypocrisy. And what people see on the outside is not really what's going on the inside. So he's saying, realize that you have an animal soul. And it's nothing to be ashamed of. Realize that you are to be a Beinoni, and a Beinoni could control that. You're not working on avoiding, you're not working on the impulse from arising. You're working on not giving into it and not letting it take you over. And that's within your range. Thank you so much, Barbara. It's a very helpful piece of advice. Great psychological insight. We are not as important as we think we are. So it's the inflated ego, which it's an interesting thing, because in some places in the Talmud, Robin, it says that you should meditate on the fact that the whole world was created for you. Bishvili nivra ha'olam. There's even a song sung about it. Bishvili, for me, the whole world was created. But over here we're saying, don't think of yourself as that great that you're a tzaddik. So, and in other places it says you should anochi afar. Abraham says, I feel like dust. I feel totally like nothing. So I think the way Hasidim explain it is you're supposed to have each thought in a different pocket. When you're feeling very high about yourself, you're supposed to pull out the card from one pocket that says you're not that great. When you're feeling like a nothing, you should pull out the other card and says, wait a minute, I can do this. The whole world was created for me. So it's depending on what moment that you're going through, which card you should be flashing, which card you should be showing. A tzaddik would not say he, she is a tzaddik. they might not say they are a Beinoni either, and some would say they are a Russia. What's interesting is if you remember, in the first chapter of the Tanya, we spoke about Rabbah. Rabbah was one of the greatest giants of Torah that ever lived. He lived in the time of the Talmud, and he says, I'm a Beinoni. Abaya says, if you're a Beinoni, what are we? What do you leave us with, right? And he made a mistake, but he thought because a Beinoni is someone who's always working. So he was always working, but he thought that maybe if I stop working, the inappropriate thoughts would come up. So that was why he was able to convince himself he's a Beinoni. But I think at Tzaddik, it's cute. My boys, they're Kanai are pretty close in age. They're 18 months apart, Yossi and Levi. So Adina and I have a funny book that we write about funny things that they say in their childhood. So that when they're older, we read them. We read it to them. And Adina's father, my father-in-law, had it for Adina and her siblings. So one of the things Levi tells Adina, this is like when he was, I think, 5. It was like 3 years ago or so. He says, in his term, he's like, when I pass away, I want to be buried next to Yossi. And Adina's like, whoa, you're like, and Levi says, because he told me he's a tzaddik, and I want to be buried next to a tzaddik. So, like Yossi whispered, I'm one of the hidden tzaddikim of the world. That's what Yossi tells Levi. Because it says in every generation there are 36 hidden tzaddikim that no one knows they're a tzaddik. It's like it's like everyone, I remember even as a kid, there used to be, we call them schnarrers, it's not the right word, but in the shul, in the synagogue, which was very, a lot of traffic, a lot of people, now it's probably closed, but a lot of people going through, there were beggars, people that would, have their hands stuck out and say, tzedakah, tzedakah. But as a kid, we weren't sure which one was just a person looking for tzedakah and which one was actually a hidden tzaddik trying to test us. So we're always like very respectful because the famous stories that tzaddikim, the hidden tzaddikim, they give off a disguise that they're a nobody. So anyway, that a tzaddik is truly humble. So anyway, thank you. And then I think I missed one. California stop. Okay, so Yaakov is asking a really good question. What if you feel upset about not acting on a negative or inappropriate thought? Why would you feel upset? You would feel joyful, right? Yaakov, you want to ask that again? What if you feel upset about not acting on a negative or inappropriate? Like you're saying that you should, like.
You want me to explain the situation?
Sure, as long as it's not too personal. But yeah, it's just if you're comfortable with it.
Okay. Well, I've been going to the truck driving